I want to introduce you to our speaker this time. We met last August. There were several of us here, Daryl Nefsker, Greg Allen, Paul Scharf, that were at an encounter group with Friends of Israel. And on second or third evening, we had a guest speaker come in and talk about anti-Semitism, and that was our speaker now. And when she finished, I went with these other guys and I said, I think we ought to have her come and speak at the Chafer conference because her content is just outstanding. And so this is Paula Joffe. Paula is an activist for Israel. She's been involved with an organization named Stand With Us. She's the third speaker I've had with Stand With Us over the years. One of them we just had in Israel. They're all outstanding. They know more than I'll ever believe I'll ever come to know. And they are right on top of all the latest information. And so you're from New Jersey, right? Up that way? She's from New York, lives in New Jersey. Yeah. And so she has been fighting anti-Semitism for several decades. She spends a lot of her time in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, talking to and educating members of Congress. So she's the mother of two sons. One we'll see on the presentation, and her other son is a major music festival. If you remember back on October 7th, there was a music festival, the Nova Festival, down in the area just outside of Gaza that was attacked, and so that resonates with her. So welcome her, and she is going to talk about anti-Semitism.
Thank you all. Let's just do a sound check before we start. No, you can't hear me. Better? Okay, great. So hello. It's great to be with you here in Houston today, and thank you for inviting me. You still can't hear me? Now you know. Okay, maybe this better. Put this closer to my mouth. Okay. It's really an honor for me to share a stage with Randall Price, who we're going to hear from tonight, and Mike Stollard. As Robbie told you, I've had a very warm relationship with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministries for many, many years. And that wonderful encounter this past summer led me to be here with you today. So as Pastor Dean has said to me many times, I love it when God's plan comes together. So living most of my life in the liberal Northeast, it afforded me access to theater and the arts, international cuisine, parks, culture, and an excellent public school education. In New York City, where my grandparents and my great-grandparents fled the pogroms of Russia and escaped Europe before the rise of Hitler. There in that city, they were able to build lives of community, faith, and business. This is where they were able to send their children to college and to lead an immigrant life so that the next generation could prosper. Here, for the most part, they were welcomed. They overcame the stigmatizing anti-Semitism that flourished in New York, as well as the rest of the country at that time. They endured that prejudice, but nobody called for their death. The New York City where I grew up, particularly in my neighborhood, in the borough of Queens, it was very multicultural. It was home to many of the people who worked at the United Nations. It was a global environment where I could hear dozens of languages and smell the fragrant aromas of cuisines from all over the world. It was lovely. So never did I imagine that a part of the country that I call home would become a hotbed of Jew hatred. Wow. I am a proud Jewish American. I'm a mom. I'm a grandmother. I'm an aunt. I'm a friend. And I'm scared. Unfortunately, I'm not alone. A recent survey of Jewish Americans concluded with the terrifying fact that the majority of Jews live in fear. A study published just last month in Allgemeiner magazine showed that nearly 80% of the Jewish community feels less safe today than they did just a year ago. Why? Because anti-Semitism is tolerated and accepted as an expression of free speech. I want to make something clear from the outset. Let's call it what it is. It's Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism is sort of the dressed up word for Jew hatred, sort of puts a shine on the racism of today. It also disguises and excuses this oldest form of racism, and that it's lumped together with Islamophobia and all forms of hatred diminishes the true evil of this unique animosity. It allows for people to claim they can criticize Israel but not hate Jews. I believe that is false. I believe that hating Israel is the same as hating the Jews. A simple definition of anti-Semitism is a hostility or prejudice against the Jewish people. It sounds simple, but Jew hatred is not. Anti-Semitism is an ever-morphing form of hatred. Anti-Semitism is a set of conspiracy theories built on various negative stereotypes, perceptions, and unsubstantiated claims about Jews. You've heard them. The Holocaust is a myth, right? The Jews orchestrated 9/11. Jews control the media and the banks. It's not okay to say these things. To quote journalist Liel Leibovitz, the creative genius of Jew hatred has always been its ability to imagine the Jew of the embodiment of whatever polite society finds repulsive. That's why anti-Semites feel comfortable accusing Jews of being weak and powerless, and at the same time of being massively powerful. Jews will claim that it's their First Amendment right to speak about Jews and Israel, even if it's a lie, even if it contradicts the facts. Friends, that isn't free speech. That's anti-Semitism. I didn't grow up in this intolerant environment. Oops. Let's go. There we go. I didn't grow up in an environment of Jew hatred, but I find myself working in it. So what I have to share with you today is not just about the newsreels you may see on the TV news every night. This is personal. By formal education, I'm a microbiologist, but life has transformed me and shaped me into an activist. I have spent my entire adult life as a professional and as a volunteer advocating on behalf of Israel. For nearly 25 years as a lay leader, I've been a part of AIPAC's National Council. AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It's the pro-Israel lobby in the United States, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Until just last year when I retired, I was the Mid-Atlantic Executive Director of an international organization called Stand With Us, and it has a crystal clear mission to fight Jew hatred and support Israel. It does so through education and supporting students on college campuses and in high school. The methods are straightforward. Give the students the confidence to stand up to the bullying and arm them with the facts and tools to make a credible case for Israel. The organization also tackles these difficult and challenging issues through legal action it takes on behalf of students, faculty, and community members who experience Jew hatred and harassment. And much of this falls under a federal rule called Title VI. During the administration of President Trump, a clear legal path was created when he approved changes to Title VI implemented by his Assistant Secretary of Education, Kenneth Marcus. Secretary Marcus ran the Office of Civil Rights, and he was charged with overseeing the enforcement of Title VI. As part of the Civil Rights Act, the important Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin for any program that receives federal funding. The Civil Rights Act, however, does not include the word religion. So until this change, Jews had no legal standing if they were victims of anti-Semitism. Accordingly, the Secretary amended language already included in Title VI, which expanded Jewish identity beyond a religious affiliation to include a shared national and cultural commonality, a peoplehood, if you will. And it is akin to identifying as any other nationality. So now, Judaism is defined not only as a religion, but as an ethnicity, a national identity, as I said, so that acts of anti-Semitism can now be ruled as hate crimes. As I'm sure you're all aware, anti-Semitic incidences globally are on the rise. Here in the United States, Jews only constitute 2.5% of the population. Yet hate crimes against Jews make up over 65% of religiously motivated hate crimes. The Anti-Defamation League, you may know it as the ADL is an organization that records hate crime statistics. And they report that there are 10 anti-Semitic incidents reported daily. That accounts for a higher percentage of hate crimes against Jews than against all other minorities combined. But since the massacre in Israel of October 7th, there has been an increase of nearly 400% year over year in the number of anti-Semitic attacks reported. Let me repeat that. An increase of 400%. That horrible date on October 7th, when these young people were kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival, you would think it marked a shift, actually, in the way that haters express their anti-Semitism. You would think, as I'm sure you do, that the massacre in Israel would have imparted a greater sense of empathy and camaraderie with the Jewish state, an understanding of what her existence means for global Jewry, at least some sympathy due to the abject brutality and violence of what had occurred. But that's not the case. In fact, it's been just the opposite. This visceral hatred of Israel translates into Jew hatred globally. The ever-changing, shape-shifting elements of anti-Semitism now present themselves not just as a hate for people who are Jews, but rather in the desire for the destruction, the annihilation of the one Jewish state, Israel. These haters want to eliminate Jews, Zionists, anyone who loves Israel. The explosion of anti-Semitic attacks and harassment on October 7th, post-October 7th, is exponential. The chants are terrifying, and they are being recited on college campuses and in rallies across the United States. Resistance by any means necessary. By any means necessary? By the killing and torturing of innocent babies like they did in the kibbutzim in southern Israel? By raping and maiming women? Especially after October 7th, this slogan has come to mean a justification of violence and murder of civilians as a form of so-called resistance. For the terrorist group Hamas, in its war to eliminate the Jewish state, brutal torture, murder, and kidnapping of innocents is that means. globalize the Intifada. This chant refers to the Intifada, violent Palestinian uprisings against Israel, specifically acts of terrorism and indiscriminate violence against civilians by these terrorist groups. And that includes bus bombings and bombings of buildings where people are sitting and having dinner, restaurants. My friend was one of the few survivors of a Jerusalem bus bombing when a terrorist, dressed as a religious Jew, blew himself up only feet from where she was standing. The message was clear. Jews, get out of Jerusalem. Jews, get out of Israel. Globalize the Intifada is a call for pro-Hamas supporters to commit these acts of violence around the world. And what about this poster? I know that it's etched into your memories like mine. The horrific vision of terrorists using paragliders to infiltrate the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel, where all these kids were there to dance and sing and celebrate life. Any group that uses a paraglider to enhance their logos or messages is saying one thing. They are saying, we glorify those terrorists. We glorify that violence. There is no other meaning. And what about from the river to the sea? Palestine will be free. Make no mistake. This is a call for a Palestinian state, not next to, not in coexistence with Israel, but instead of Israel, covering the land from the Jordan River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. And then there's Intifada revolution. There is only one solution. One solution? The final solution? These demonstrators aren't really calling for a state of Palestine. They are demanding the destruction and elimination of the state of Israel. This toxic atmosphere across our nation now, this attitude and this outlook towards Israel and the Jews, is reminiscent of Europe of the 1920s and 30s. It's enough to make Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, beam with pride. The haters are very organized. Look at this. This is a calendar of anti-Israel protests and demonstrations in cities all over America and all over the world. These are not peaceful gatherings. Rather, they are calls for genocide, demanding the elimination of the Jewish state, insisting that life-saving American aid to Israel be cut, actually suggesting that the slaughter of innocent Israelis on October 7th was the fault of Israel. The abominable twisting of lies into facts only serves to undermine the existence of the world's only Jewish state. This is nothing short of outright Jew hatred. Most of the people who participate in these events don't even know the facts. Ask a college kid who is chanting from the river to the sea. Ask them, which river? Ask them, which sea? They don't know, and it doesn't matter to them. They only know that they hate Jews and believe that calling for their demise is their right. This did not start, though, with the massacre on October 7th. The Israel haters have been prepared. The day after the attacks, the pro-Israel Christian group, the Philos Project, a wonderful organization, they organized a rally in support of the victims of terror to show solidarity with the local Jewish community. It was scheduled to take place at the Israeli consulate in New York City and was to be a small, peaceful, song-filled gathering. Instead, the police had to be called to set up barriers separating the Zionists from the Jew haters, who gathered in such large numbers and were there threatening the peaceful group. The pro-Hamas demonstrators were there with pre-printed signs, Palestinian flags, and hateful slogans. The enemies of Israel already had their supplies, their protesters, their funding to be able to react so quickly to an event that was promoted only to Philo supporters. Just days before the massacre in southern Israel, the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia hosted the Palestine Rights Literature Festival. This slide is from their website, defining what Palestine looks like. I don't know, looks like Israel to me. The list of speakers included people who were not poets, not writers, not literary icons. They were a litany of anti-Israel, Jew-hating names like the rabid anti-Semite Roger Waters, the former frontman for the British rock group Pink Floyd. Here he is, dressed in neo-Nazi garb from a recent concert in Berlin. His concerts and Pink Floyd concerts were known for the inflatable pig that would pass over the audience. Look at the markings on the pig's face. Another speaker was Mark Lamont Hill, a tenured communications professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. If he looks familiar to you, it's because he was also a commentator on CNN. But he was fired from that job when he chanted the hateful anti-Israel slogan, "From the river to the sea," at the United Nations in a speech lamenting the Nakba. Do you know what the Nakba is? The Nakba translates from Arabic into catastrophe, and it's used by Israel haters to describe the day that Israel was recognized as a state. He lost his job at CNN. He kept his job at Temple, though. An autistic 17-year-old who was nonverbal was a victim of a horrible hate crime at his Las Vegas high school. He wears a kippah, a yarmulke, and he uses a service dog, so he's clearly identified not only as a special needs student, but as a Jew. His mother pulled him from school when he came home with a swastika carved into his back.
Wow.
After October 7th, at the high school that my children attended, one that has a very large Jewish population, that is across the street from the Jewish Community Center, one that is rated as a top high school in New Jersey, a neighbor's son was attacked by another student dressed as a jihadist. He was assaulted because he posted pictures of his fellow students dressed like this on his social media feed. Can you imagine that children are allowed to go to school dressed like this? But what do we see here? We see the attacker in the lunchroom as he's on his way to assault my friend's son. He was suspended, but so was the boy who was attacked. And they gave the Jewish student the longer suspension. To our community's shock and alarm, our institutions are being victimized by the newest anti-Semitic crime, swatting. This is when false bomb threats are called into institutions, prompting the highest levels of alert, both for the people in the buildings and for law enforcement. This tactic, which according to the Jewish Federation's chief security officer, is on the rise nationally and recently has been geared to target Jewish institutions, it has a single purpose: to create fear and panic. This past summer, our Jewish day camp was swatted while camp was in session, forcing the evacuation of the facility. The kids in camp were 3 and 4 years old. Can you imagine how scared they were? I told you this is personal. My son lives in Brooklyn, in New York City. Last November, only a few weeks after the October 7th massacre in Israel, a pro-Hamas group organized a rally that was scheduled to march through Brooklyn's Jewish neighborhoods. Unbelievably, city officials warned the Jewish residents to stay home on that day because the police could not guarantee their safety.
Wow.
My son was outraged, as was I, frankly. And instead of shutting down a potentially dangerous and violent gathering, they warned the Jews to hunker down and hide.
Wow.
Well, that didn't sit well with him. So he took his American and Israeli flags and went to the march site.
We've got thousands of marchers here. They're trying to intimidate me. They will not. I've got press all around me snapping shots because I'm the only one here doing this. It's America. This is a democracy. This guy's giving me a finger right in front of me. These guys want death to Jews. They want death to America. It's insane. Now let me turn the camera. Oh, I can't turn the camera. I'll try to show you a selfie of how many there are marching up this way. All the way up there. I'll turn around. You can see it. They just keep coming. It's Prospect Park in Brooklyn. They were telling all the Jews today to stay away, stay home in Crown Heights. Freedom, democracy, life, liberty, love, peace.
Wow.
While he was standing on the sidelines, proudly waving his flags, not interacting with the marchers, he was assaulted. People surrounded him and slapped these horrible stickers all over him. He had to seek police protection. And again, instead of arresting the people who attacked him, the police told him, "Go home."
Wow.
As I was preparing these remarks, my son sent me this tweet. You can see that's a picture of him. It was posted on X, on Twitter, by Mossab Hassan Youssef. You may know him as the Green Prince. He is the son of the founder of the terrorist group Hamas and grew up in the West Bank in a culture of violence and hatred for Jews and for Israel. But now he speaks out against Hamas and the need for Islam to reform. He lives in the United States. He converted to Christianity, and he is a noble pro-Israel advocate. Youssef is critical of Westerners who believe that just by giving the Arabs of Gaza and Judea and Samaria a state of their own, then the violence will stop. And that's what he's referencing here in this tweet. But you can see that my son is just standing there holding his flags on the sidelines when a demonstrator goes out of his way to make an obscene gesture. Ever since that day when he was assaulted, he's been chronicling pro-Hamas incidents, marches, and graffiti in New York City. Home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, my hometown has become a cesspool of Jew hatred. And these photos are just from his neighborhood. People are being forced to make choices, deny their Jewishness, which clearly my son does not, deny their pro-Israel sentiments, remove their religious garb, like a yarmulke or a Star of David, all to thwart physical and psychological anti-Semitic attacks. Pro-Israel individuals, Jews and non-Jews, must subjugate their feelings towards the one Jewish state, lest they become victims of violence and vandalism, just like we saw here in Houston a couple of weeks ago when a shooter opened fire at Joel Osteen's church. On the butt of the shooter's rifle was a sticker that said, "Free Palestine." Or in academic environments, where students are frequently punished by anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist faculty. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to use our voices to speak out against Jew hatred, to ensure that pro-Israel people and Zionists like me, like you, feel safe. So what can we do? The most essential way to fight Jew hatred and prejudice against Zionists is to know the facts and to get your information from reliable sources. Stand With Us is a good resource. So is AIPAC. Online, you can get the Times of Israel, an English language newspaper that's published in Israel. If your cable provider offers it, watch I-24 News Network, an English language news broadcast from Israel, and they also broadcast in Spanish. Follow these organizations on Instagram and Facebook and X, Twitter. When you read an article, always look to see who has written it and in which publication it's printed. This will be helpful to you in identifying the political perspective of the author. Understand that most influential newspapers in the country and the television news networks and radio stations constantly censor their news by omitting crucial facts, or worse, by presenting opinion pieces as if they are news, like they do in the New York Times and the Washington Post. We must read the newspapers with a very keen eye for the truth. The next step in fighting for any cause is identifying what you're fighting against. And for years, there has not been a standard against which to measure what constitutes an anti-Semitic action, until now. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, known as IHRA, the IHRA definition, as seen here, is that metric, and it should be universally adopted by governments, businesses, colleges, and universities. This non-legally binding definition offers guidelines of what is and what is not anti-Semitism. These examples in the guidelines show local officials how to identify anti-Semitism and to take actions demanding changes in programming or withholding public funding. This definition of anti-Semitism was agreed upon by this international alliance in a unanimous vote by the 35 member countries that comprise it. It's been adopted by 25 of 27 European Union nations, 34 US states, numerous American counties and cities. It's interesting, too, that the IHRA was founded by former Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson after a study in his country revealed that school children had a stunning lack of knowledge about the Holocaust. It also coincided with a visit that he took to a former concentration camp in Germany. It's incumbent upon us to urge our local legislators to pass the IHRA standard. This past summer, I led a diverse group of citizens, including Christian friends, to present the idea of passing IHRA to our local Board of Commissioners. We made the case, and Camden County became the first county in the state of New Jersey to pass IHRA. Some of you may know Pastor Ed Muska from New Jersey. He was at that same wonderful Friends of Israel encounter group where I met Pastor Dean. When Ed heard what we did with IHRA in Camden County, he took the idea home to his wife, Chris. Chris was serving on her township council. Chris discussed this idea with her council colleagues, and then what happened in their small New Jersey town? They passed IHRA. And now Ed's community is one of a handful of communities to have done so. So I know Ed and Chris aren't here, but I just want to publicly thank them for that leadership and for setting an example of how you can localize the battle against anti-Semitism. Another thing we can do is to keep a very close eye on what's being taught in our schools. Even if your kids are grown, it's important to know what your school curricula are. Insist that your schools include Holocaust education. Many states mandate this, but often individual school districts opt not to teach it. Fight the inclusion of ethnic studies classes that are formatted with critical race theory progressivism. This slide is from a parent group advocating in favor of ethnic studies. Note that the map of Palestine is actually the map of Israel in its entirety. The curricula of ethnic studies classes are rooted in the supposition that Israel is an illegitimate entity. This concept is being taught in public schools all over the country. Vote for like-minded school board members, or consider running yourselves. Attend school board meetings if possible, and voice your opinions when an anti-Israel or anti-Semitic proposals are on the agenda. If you are a graduate of a college or a university, or you have a kid at college, know what's happening at your school. If there are active chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, let your alumni office know that you are ashamed that your school would allow a violent hate group to be active on campus. Demand that they ban SJP. If there are campus protests, like this Israel Apartheid Week at Harvard, or student government proposals to boycott, divest, and sanction, known as the BDS movement, then withhold donations to that school, to whatever department, no matter how small a donation you may give. It makes an impact. If your school allows anti-Israel demonstrations supporting Hamas like this one, then you must speak out. Keep an eye out for anti-Zionist teachers and professors. Report anti-Semitic actions taken against students and faculty to specialized legal organizations like the Lawfare Project, the Center for Combating Antisemitism, or the Deborah Project. At Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, a chemistry teaching assistant posted a poll on her social media feed asking whether she should purposely lower the grades of her Jewish and Zionist students. She wrote, "Ethical dilemma. If you have to grade a Zionist student's exam, do you still give them all their points even though they support your ethnic cleansing, like IDK? Like I don't know." By the way, she wasn't fired for that remark, so it gives a green light to treat your Zionist students differently. That cannot be allowed. The worst case of these outrageous behaviors takes place at our most prestigious Ivy League universities. I'm sure you're all aware of the congressional hearings where the presidents of these schools, President Gay of Harvard, President McGill of the University of Pennsylvania, and here President Kornbluth at MIT, were called to testify about anti-Semitism on their campuses. Their abysmal testimonies, in which they were unable to answer questions about anti-Semitism and free speech contributing to violence and harassment at their schools, led to the resignations of Ms. Gay and Ms. McGill. In case you didn't see that testimony, here's a soundbite from the congressional hearing.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
Yes
speech
or no?
becomes if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, amazing. Their testimonies led to the institution's most prominent donors withholding their significant contributions. Bill Ackman, a hedge fund donor and a Harvard graduate, withheld millions of dollars to his alma mater. Mark Rowan, a private equity investor, and his alma mater is University of Pennsylvania, he too withheld millions of dollars. But you don't have to be a multimillionaire to make a statement like that. My friend, who created a small scholarship of a few $1,000s at his alma mater, Rutgers University, also withheld his donations until the school addresses anti-Semitism on its campus. But perhaps the most important thing that you can do to battle this scourge is to become politically engaged by learning the issues impacting the U.S.-Israel relationship. Why? Because Israel is an American value, serving uniquely as our eyes and ears in the Middle East, a part of the world that is a flashpoint for anti-Americanism. Because if Israel didn't exist, America would have to invent her, because a safe America depends on safe and strong allies, and Israel is America's greatest ally. I strongly urge you to become a member of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. People like you and me can actually have a way to impact policy in Washington. We learn the issues, we engage members of Congress, and we can sometimes get involved in their campaigns. There are AIPAC materials and Israel flag buttons and Israel 75th anniversary medallions for you in one of the rooms. Please take this information with you. But you may ask, how does one get all this information about the issues? Well, just become a member of AIPAC like me. It's easy. It's free. You just take out your phones, take out your phones, and go to www.aipac.org and sign up. It's that easy. You will now get the information you need to keep you abreast of the most critical issues of the day. And while you're on the website, you can click the tab that says Policy, and here you can learn about legislation that many of us, a lot of people in this room already do it, that many of us discuss with members of Congress on a regular basis. I also propose that you get to know your local congressperson. Attend their town hall meetings to express support for Israel. My congressman in New Jersey is a very pro-Israel Democrat. At his town hall meeting just a few weeks ago, pro-Hamas supporters tried to disrupt it by shouting and jeering. He told them, I'll take your questions at the end of the session, but they were having no part of it. They would not sit down. They would not be quiet. Security had to be called to eject them from the room. Once decorum was restored, a woman approached the microphone, expressed her support for Israel, and her disgust at the behavior of the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel protesters. The audience cheered her. The congressman told me that the way the people responded to her was not lost on him. Knowing that your constituents support your actions gives members of Congress the confidence to vote in favor of pro-Israel legislation. This is a great example of people having an impact. Call congressional offices to say thank you when they support an important vote that enhances Israeli security and the alliance between our countries. Call them to urge them to vote on an important piece of legislation that is necessary. Call them to urge them to vote in favor of resolutions that condemn anti-Semitism. As a member of AIPAC, you will get action alerts with the information about the issues and direct links to the offices of your individual congresspeople. Let me tell you, when you call with a call of thanks and support, it is so appreciated. Israel's enemies call congressional offices all the time in overwhelming numbers, even to offices where they to people that aren't even their congresspeople, and they put tremendous pressure on the members to vote against American and Israeli interests. And if possible, offer financial support to candidates who have a pro-Israel voting record. I'm happy to discuss how we do this later with you. Here's my contact information so we can stay in touch. We have a lot of work to do because I don't see this rash of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred abating anytime soon. So I want to thank you in advance for all that you're going to do to help fight this scourge, to help fight anti-Semitism. I do want to leave you with some good news, though. Over these past couple of years, and certainly since October 7th, there has been a palpable increase in Jewish identity, declarations of Zionism, and a desire to become engaged in the Jewish and pro-Israel communities. Jewish and Zionist students are taking advantage of the update in Title VI and are suing their universities. Just 2 weeks ago, multiple lawsuits representing students and faculty who were harassed on campus were filed against such institutions as Harvard, Columbia University in New York, Middlebury College in Vermont, the University of California at Berkeley, just to name a few. Faculty members are also banding together to push back against anti-Semitism, even though they risk their careers by doing so. The battle is not over, but I am beyond grateful that we are fighting this together and that we're on the same side. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live. Thank you. Waiting for Robbie.
Thank you, Paula. Here we go. Anybody have a question, comment, concern? Quiet? There's one back here.
Thank you very much. I was hoping you could interact with, there's this, I don't know if it's the ADL, but I think one of these ads ran during the Super Bowl, which started with the October 7th premise, but then in predictable fashion ended up, and you mentioned this at the beginning, lumping anti-Muslim hate, anti-LGBTQ, et cetera, hate. And it strikes me that that is the approach of almost all of our major institutions. You mentioned higher academia, but all institutions. At the time that, or around another rise of anti-Semitism, the firm that I worked for at the time put out a statement, but they had to at first solicit not just one of their Jewish partners, but also Muslim partners, so that the statement could be tempered and not just say, we condemn anti-Semitism, because to a lot of our institutions today, that is too, quote unquote, a political of a statement. Mm-hmm. So I was hoping you could interact with that premise and the idea that anti-Semitism, condemning anti-Semitism alone, which is what all of us should do, frankly, I think everyone in this room does, also has to be accompanied by, I'm against other forms of hate as well.
Thank you. So I agree with you, and I addressed that at the beginning, because I think that anti-Semitism is a hatred that can stand on its own 2 feet. The commercial was actually a product of an organization that was started by the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft. And it is his attempt to help people, especially who are sports-oriented, deal with anti-Semitism. He is one of the only sports owners that takes his incoming players and actually runs them through a course on anti-Semitism and has experts come in and talk to them about what it is, and tries to make that distinction between anti-Semitism, that it is not a political statement, it is not a free speech statement, but it is actually an expression of hatred and racism. It's challenging for those of us who fight anti-Semitism that it's lumped together with all forms of hatred. I mean, I was in 3rd grade when I learned that hate is bad. You know, I don't have to be told that hate is bad. But anti-Semitism is a horrific ancient crime. And people that express it frequently are calling for my demise. There's a concept of intersectionality. Are you familiar with that? Do you know what that is? Right. So groups, it's become very much a principle of critical race theory and, you know, wokeism. But it views the world as oppressor and oppressed. And all the people who are oppressed are linked in their victimhood. And they're linked on a ladder of victim hierarchy. And the higher you are on the ladder, the more victimized you are. For some reason, the Palestinians have risen to the top of that ladder. So in today's world, you can't really talk about anti-Semitism without talking about the most oppressed victims. Frequently, anti-Semitism isn't even recognized as a crime because Jews cannot be oppressors. They cannot be oppressed, I'm sorry. They are the oppressors. They cannot be oppressed. So it tempers the statement. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong. And I think where you see it, you should call it out. And you say, no, if there's anti-Semitism, we're calling out anti-Semitism.
Any other questions? We got a couple more back there.
Paula, thank you for your presentation. My question is this: are any Jewish agencies doing anything, institutions, about the fact that in so many of the universities, the Middle Eastern departments don't have anything about Israel? It's all about all the other countries, but nothing about Israel. Anything going on in that part?
Well, they do have things about Israel, and it's usually not good. It's that Israel is an oppressor, a conqueror, and there's no discussion that Israel is the most successful example of an indigenous people returning to their homeland. You'll never hear that expressed. But there are organizations. There's Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. That is a global institution that works with departments on campus, faculty. There's the Department of Middle Eastern Studies that works to dispel some of the horrible curricula that they put out. Also keep in mind, and this is something that's now being recognized on Capitol Hill, that a lot of these Middle Eastern studies programs at the universities that are teaching anti-Israel hatred are funded by countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Doha, Qatar, and they are funding the Jew hatred. So getting a handle on overseas money that is allowed to come in, not being disclosed, funding chairs at universities. We're starting to see a little crack in that, and there may be some regulation. But there are those that deal with the curricula. To help the students on campus, Stand With Us does that. A lot of the other major organizations also have campus student help. Zionist Organization of America, the American Jewish Congress. There are several.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. My wife and I have been members of the Jewish Community Center in Portland, Oregon for almost 10 years, and frequently over that time, we come home, and we talk about how they can seem to support organizations that will turn on them later on when the going gets tough, like in this situation. Over the years, we've seen that, and we comment on that. So, and I wonder if maybe I'd like you to comment on maybe they're trying to appease these organizations. Hopefully they'll be nice to them later when the going gets rough, or is there a turning away? Have they recognized that maybe they're supporting the wrong causes? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. The Jewish community since the late 1800s, when there were massive immigration from Europe, when my grandparents came here, my great-grandparents came here. There's always been an affinity with people who did not receive justice. They formed alliances with the African American community. We saw the Freedom Riders go down in Mississippi, 2 nice Jewish boys from New York, murdered for trying to help black people register to vote. So there's been a long history of alliances, Jews with the underdog, Jews with people who have suffered prejudice. After October 7th, there has been a stunning silence on behalf of those groups. All the women's groups who talk about sexual violence, where are they? Why have they remained silent on what happened to the women who were gang raped in Israel, who were mutilated, who were sexual targets? Where are they? Silence. There was common cause with Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd. Where's the African American community? Why aren't they standing up, with the exception of Dumasami Washington, who's somebody you should follow, or follow a group on Instagram called Black Jewish Unity? Where? There's a reevaluation happening. It's not a happy reevaluation because we really thought that we were in a human brotherhood. But sometimes you're smacked in the face with facts and you wake up and you realize what's going on.
Robbie, I got one here.
I'm pretty dumb, and I may be opening a can of worms that we don't want to open. But a lot of our media have Jewish roots, and they've been extremely silent. Could you address that with your perspective on how or why, if there'll be a change?
I'm horrified by it. It's horrifying. When I hear people who are setting out to murder Jews, and the news media refuse to call them terrorists, they call these people militants or activists. They're not, they're terrorists. When facts are omitted, when the news media report things that are just not true, a perfect example is what happened a few months ago in the Israel-Gaza war, when the news media flashed all over the screens that the Israelis bombed a hospital in Gaza City and 500 people were murdered. That's not what happened. When the health ministry of Gaza, which is run by Hamas, reports that 30,000 people have been killed, who's included in that group? 15,000 terrorists. People that were killed when Hamas rocketry failed and killed its own people. People who died of natural causes. But the news media believes this at face value. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. So it becomes incumbent upon us to seek out the truth. I don't have an answer to the why. It seems unfair to me because I look at journalists. My father was a newspaper editor. So I look at journalists as being truth seekers. And if you're going to be a journalist, you're going to report the truth, and I rely on you. But I'm smart enough now to know I can't rely on what I hear on the news, that I can't rely on what I read in the paper. So I don't know if things are going to change, but I agree with you. We just have to, it's our own responsibility to find out what the facts are and to tell your friends what the facts are.
Paula, we've seen a lot on TV of uprisings in the Northeast colleges, some in California. Been very little that I've been aware of from schools in this part of the country, specifically Texas. Has there been any position one way or the other among college students in this part of the country?
I don't know. I don't know, but I do know that there are schools in the South where there have been acts of violence. But then there are people who are at the helm of their universities who take bold stands, like the president of the University of Florida system, Ben Sass, who has banned Students for Justice in Palestine from the campus, from the university system all over the state. That's pretty bold. There are a lot of lawsuits that have been instituted by students, but it has to go through the system. And the backlog of Title VI isn't just for students who experience or people that experience anti-Semitism. It's for any kind of harassment. And the caseload that the government is facing is huge. So there may be cases out there and they just haven't moved up in the rank yet, so we haven't heard about them. But I would be grateful to know that schools here in Texas don't have that. I would be grateful to hear that.
I'm very pro-Israel. I don't want you to get anything mistaken about this, but
Okay.
And I don't think anybody in here has very much faith in any political parties. But we are a two-party country politically. And it's my observation that Jewish people and for the most part Jewish institutions are overwhelmingly, I mean overwhelmingly, aligned with liberal Democrats. Now, a few minutes ago, you kind of nibbled around the edge of this issue, but I am wondering, are organizations like AIPAC doing anything to try to reach Jewish people saying, wait a minute, liberal Democrats are not where you want to be, or anything similar to that?
So first of all, I'm a volunteer with AIPAC, so I don't speak for the organization. But we are a two-party system, like you said. And there are districts in this country that are always going to be Democrat. No matter what the issues are, they're going to be Democratic districts, and the congressperson is always going to be a Democrat. Do you want that Democrat to be favorable to Israel or not favorable to Israel? You want that person to know the issues. You want to bring them along if they are pro-Israel, even if they are progressive or liberal on some of the other issues. My job then is to help educate them. Your job could be to help educate them, bring them along. Be sure that when it comes to an issue regarding the U.S.-Israel friendship, that they are in favor of it, not against it. You want another Rashida Tlaib or another AOC? No, you don't want a squad member. You want somebody who is pro-Israel. And, the pendulum swings. The pendulum swings. The country goes from being more conservative to being more liberal, back to being conservative. We have to have people in place so that they are pro-Israel no matter where that pendulum is. So AIPAC is always going to work with people regardless of their political party to ensure that the outcome of their views, going to Israel, learning about Israel, seeing Israel firsthand, coming home and voting in favor of Israel. That's the key. That's the focus. Party's not the issue.
I was as a career, I was in advertising, marketing, PR, that kind of thing. I was watching a documentary on the Palestinians and the Israelis. And this is kind of funny, but what they brought up was, I think it was in the 80s, Arafat hired a PR firm. It was the same, now I did not check this out, but they said it was the same PR firm that the pork industry hired in like the 50s, that created the motto that says breakfast is the most important meal. So that did not come from science, that came from marketing. But what I don't, and anyway, they hired this firm, and this firm created them into victims. It made them victims in the eyes of the world. And I've always been so astonished how Israel has never really had a real good PR program.
You're right. It's called Hasbara, and Israel is not very good at it. I have to agree with you. But it doesn't help. Going back to your question about the media also are looking for things that are sensational. So they're going to show the bloody victims of the horrific bombing. But I see, because I pay attention to these things, I see that horrible bloodied victim over here all wrapped up, and then I see him 2 weeks later in a morgue wrapped in a shroud, and then I see him 2 weeks later and he's got his head in a bandage. So this is an actor, a paid actor, who's going from place to place to place. I was at a meeting many years ago with Paul Begala. Paul Begala is a Democratic strategist, and this was a meeting about Israel. Paul Begala is very, very pro-Israel, and he was talking about just this subject, and he said, "Facts tell, stories sell." He said, the Palestinians tell great stories, and the Israelis then have to clean it up and tell the facts. But it's too late because everybody's seen the story. So I don't disagree with how you're feeling, and I wish there were a better program too. But we can be that ad agency because we know the truth. So we can tell the truth. We can tell our friends. We can tell anybody that will listen. We can teach our children, and we can teach them the truth, because the truth will set us free.
Anybody have any other questions? All right, well, Paula, thank you very much.
Thank you.